Hi, I'm Nancy Stevens, and this is the TeachCyberLab help session for Unit 5, Lesson 3. It's on hashes and the password audit lab. So the first activity on cryptographic hash functions does not require the US cyber range. It's an activity that just requires a web browser. And the second activity will go on to the cyber range for. So as a review, we're looking at this problem of Bob and Alice communicating and sharing some information. And how does Bob know that what he receives from Alice is actually what she sent or intended to send? And so one way to solve that is with a cryptographic hash function. So we're looking at this question of integrity. And so one way this can work is in some of our messaging services like WhatsApp and Signal right now. In addition to the message being sent, there can be another little piece of information called a hash. And that hash gets created by the sender of the message. And when the receiver receives it, they receive the message and a hash is generated, and the two hashes are then compared. And if they are the same, then we would say that the message that was received was indeed the message that was sent. Same thing occurs with passwords. Passwords can be stored securely using cryptographic hash functions, and the hash is actually stored, not the password in plain text. And so when you log into a website, the password that you type in is again hashed using the same algorithm, and the two hashes are compared. And if they match, you're able to log into the website. So a few things that are important about hash functions is that they can take some data of an arbitrary size and compute it into some data that is of a fixed size. So in other words, you can't look at the hash and guess how long that input was, right? Hash functions are intended to be one way. So whereas we've been talking about encryption and decryption, in this case, we're just talking about hashing something in a one-way mathematical function. There's some other things that are important about hash functions as well, and they're outlined on the slide. They should be very fast, very efficient. They should use pseudo-randomness because if someone were able to figure out patterns or see patterns, then certainly that they would no longer be secure. Two inputs should not have the same hash value. That's collision resistance. It should be infeasible to figure out the input once you're looking at the output of something. So those are the general requirements, characteristics that we talk about in hash functions. And again, they can be used to digitally sign things. They are used in passwords. And so there's more information in the slide deck, but that's the essential things that I'll cover right now. So there's an activity in which students are going to generate some hashes, and then they're also going to work in the opposite way to learn a little something about rainbow tables. And so in the first example, and there are lots of different algorithms for hash functions. We purposely selected some of the older functions that aren't as lengthy, but students are going to take some strings like password with a capital P, password with an exclamation at the end, password with an exclamation at the beginning. And they're going to go to a website and generate hashes. So I can do a text input and I can click the button that says hash. And on this website, if I scroll down, the first column is the name of the hash function that I'm using. And then the second column over is showing the cryptographic hash. And the reason students are doing variations on the word password is so that they can see that even though the 4 inputs are similar, using the word password with just a little bit of variation, the output, the hashes, are quite different as you look at the output. And that's a significant factor with hashes. Then the second part of the activity has students take a hash and go to another website and input that hash. And I've already done it here, but you can see there's the hash that I input, and it said that's the word security. Well, I talked about how these are supposed to be one-way functions. How is it that this website decrypted, or did it decrypt the hash? And this is the use of a lookup table. So there are a lot of passwords out there, actually billions of passwords that have been cracked in various ways. One, maybe because they were weak passwords. Two, because they've been involved in some sort of data breach. And so online, there are websites known as rainbow tables that aren't actually reverse engineering hashes. They're simply looking up hashes in a table of information. And so if you can do that with a password, then you should come to the conclusion that that's probably not a good password to use at all. And so that's the second part of the activity, just to be clear about what students are doing. They're not actually breaking hashes, they're just looking them up. So that takes us to the cyber range lab, which is the next part of this lesson. And in the cyber range, we're actually going to do some password cracking with some software called John the Ripper. So I'm on the cyber range, and I'm going to open up a command prompt. And I need to have root authority. So I'll simply put that in. And we're going to start looking at some things in terms of how Linux works with passwords. And so this first command is simply listing some system accounts and giving me some information about those accounts. And this might look like just nonsense of some sort. But if I go up here to this top line, this is simply telling me that there is a user account called root. The colons are separators for data fields in this file. The X indicates that the password for root is encrypted. And then there's some other information here about user IDs and group IDs, and I can't explain like off the top of my head all those other things, but that's what I'm looking at. I'm just using the cat command to get some information about passwords on the system. The next thing that students do in the lab is to work with the shadow file. And again, colons are the separators when you look at the information in this file again. And when we do this, it's showing us the encrypted password for usernames that I have access to. And so when you see these long strings in here for student -A and student -B and student 1 and student 2, those are users that I have created. And it's showing you some information about their password. So it's showing you the hash, the hashing algorithm. There's some other information in there about how old their password is, when it was last changed, that kind of information. So I can do another command here where I can say, oops, shadow. And I can grep one of those user accounts and get a little more output information there. So again, it's showing me accounts that I have access to here with student. So that's just a little introduction at the beginning so that students can have a little experience with looking at how Linux does this sort of thing. If you were in a Windows environment, Windows has a database file that I think it's called SAM, Security Account Manager, and it stores that similar kinds of information just in a different way. But the gist of this activity is for students to create 2 users and to give one user an extremely weak password and to give the second user a stronger password. And by weak and stronger, we're simply talking about maybe a weak password is just a dictionary word. And then a stronger password could use 3 dictionary words or introduce some numbers or some special characters. And then they're going to run the John the Ripper software to see if they can crack those passwords. So in order to do this, they're going to need to add a user, and they're going to have to give that user a name. So I could say student-3 because I already have a student 1 and 2. Well, actually, I just do student 3. And I have to give that student user a password. All right. And then retype the password. And we don't need to enter in the full name and those other fields of data, so you can just hit enter through those and say, yes, that's correct. And then again, we need to add another user. And again, that student user needs a more complex password. So and I don't need to save, put in all that information, and I'll just hit yes. And now I've created my 2 users. So now we want to make a copy of that shadow file that has the password information in it. And so we're actually going to copy it from etc shadow. And we need to give it a name. And so I'll just call it password file txt. All right, so that's the next step. And if I wanted to look at that file, I could say cat password file txt. And so that's the copy of the file that I'm working with. And so now to use the John the Ripper software, I'm going to say John, and I'm going to specify the password file that I want it to use. All right, so now it's running John the Ripper. And already it's figured out that the password for student 3 is the word password. And you can see that it did that pretty quickly. And above there, you can see that in terms of rules, it's using a file called word list. The program's still running. So one thing that's in the instructions you'll want to make sure to review with students is how do you stop execution of a file, and that is Control+C. Because if students really used a strong password, this program is going to run for quite a while. And so we want to let it run for a little bit, but we don't want it to run for hours and hours and hours. So I'll let it run just a little bit there, but at some point, just recall that you're going to need to do Control+C to stop the program from running. All right, so I'm going to do Control+C, and that's going to break that John the Ripper session. So now once students have done that, there's a couple of other things they can do. Let's see if this works. And I've got a little file that shows that I have indeed cracked some passwords from that password file. Not all of them. Says that there's 5 that are cracked, 2 that still have not yet been cracked. And if you look at that output, you can see that I used the password 123456 on one. I used the word password. I used 12345. The student user has the password student, and that's another one that was cracked. If students wanted to see, for instance, so what words did it use, right? As it was running that process, what words did it actually use? They can go find that file. Let me see if I can remember where it is. It is in the file system. I think it's in user share. John is the folder that I'm looking for. Yep, right there. And in here, there should be a file called password.lst. Right there it is, password.lst. And so I can open up that file and I can look at the passwords that are in that file. And so you can see right off the bat that this word list starts off with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and password 1. And as you scroll down through the list, there's just lots of common words in that file. And so that gives students a little bit of an experience with how John the Ripper works and why it's such a terrible idea to use dictionary words, and why it's important to use strong passwords and not to reuse passwords. And if you were paying attention to that password.list file, you might see some words that you might not be comfortable with in your classroom that are in there. So I'll just give you a fair warning that just be careful in terms of what you display in your classroom. So that is a quick little overview of hashes and a cyber range activity that are in Unit 5, Lesson 3. Thanks.